afternoon or good evening, depending on what time you're watching. It is Saturday and the Tropical Outlook. Thanks for clicking on. I hope you're enjoying your weekend so far. Before we continue with the video, be sure to hit that like button, share with your friends and family, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Lots going on here on the channel. 7 days a week spitting out content here. Local as well as global analysis. And we do have the global weather and climate report, as always, at 4 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, looking at all the extremes that have been taking place around the planet over the last week or so. And we know that there has been a lot going on with regards to severe weather. But we have got, this is the current look across the planet with regards to tropical activity. We have a few areas of interest in the Atlantic. We are seeing activity start to ramp up as the MJO moves into the West Atlantic Basin. So we're taking the lid off things, and we're going to start to see a few threats over the next week to 2 week period. We have got the extratropical storm 23W. I don't know if that's the remnants of Kong-Rey or not. I'm not sure. In fact, I don't think it is. But notice here it's up towards Japan, creating flash flooding in parts of Osaka and adjacent areas of southern Honshu prefecture. We also have a tropical storm Lane in the East Pacific, got an invest area in the southern portions of the Caribbean, and we've also got subtropical storm Paddy at the moment to speak about as well. No real threat with Paddy, which is good news. Looking at how things have panned out so far. So we've seen 16 tropical depressions, 16 tropical storms, 10 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin so far this season. Moving into the Pacific, and this is how things are looking with regards to numbers. We've had 14 depressions, 13 storms, 5 hurricanes, and 3 majors. And the average for the East Pacific is 15 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 majors. Then moving over to the West Pacific, and we've had 33 depressions, 21 tropical storms, 8 typhoons, and unofficially 3 super typhoons. And we had quite a significant impact in the last several days from Kong-Rey. We'll talk about that in the Global Weather Report tomorrow. The average would be 25.5 tropical storms, 16 typhoons, and 9.3 super typhoons. So we are running below average both in the East as well as the West Pacific Basin. Looking at the Atlantic then, we do have a subtropical storm Paddy, which is just to the west of the Azores at the moment. We've got an area of interest just to the north of Puerto Rico. We're going to see more significant flooding. We've seen that in recent days on Puerto Rico, and it looks as if that's going to continue over the next few days. And then we've got a 60% chance of development with this feature over the southern Caribbean in the next 48 hours. But that chance increases significantly as we move to the 7-day projection. There's subtropical storm Paddy. We'll look at that in just a second. No threat, like I say, 10% over the next 7 days for this disturbance number 2. And then we've now got an 80% chance of development within the Caribbean over the next 7 days or so. But it looks as if the modelling is seeing the feature to the north of Puerto Rico and the feature over the southern Caribbean, which really there isn't really much to look at with this. The modelling actually sees these two features coming together and becoming one feature. So quite interesting, some of the model output with regards to the future of these two areas of interest. So looking at before we look at the models, and also we're going to have a quick glance at the La Nina as well. Sea surface temperature anomalies have came down quite a significant amount over particularly the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen not only obviously the remnants of the movement of Milton upwell waters within the Gulf of Mexico, removing some of that ocean heat content. We've also seen colder air getting pushed southwards off the south coast, off the Gulf Coast, and we've actually cooled the shelf waters quite significantly actually. But even in the central Gulf, we're borderline conducive for supporting tropical cyclones. 27, 28 Celsius is pretty much just that kind of borderline, that cusp between unfavorable versus favorable. And the problem that we do have is that we've still got a lot of heat within the Caribbean. We've also got some high ocean heat content as well. So anything that develops has a better chance of becoming something greater than a tropical storm, for example, would be if it forms within the Caribbean. Also, we've got lighter winds within the Caribbean compared to the Gulf of Mexico at the moment here, but the conditions do appear to become a little bit more favourable. We'll look at that also in a little while or so. But in terms of the actual anomalies here, you can see that we are actually slightly below average across parts of central and western interior Gulf of Mexico, and also the east of the Gulf of Mexico towards the Keys, up towards Naples and Tampa. We've got an area of colder than average waters here. That could be the legacy of Milton, but also we've got the cold fronts that are now starting to descend southwards over the southeastern United States at this time of the year. We've also got the slightly below average waters in the western side of the Bahamas as well. But notice the Caribbean remains warmer than average. We've got the 30 Celsius down to a decent depth below the surface. So therefore, we've got plenty of fuel here within this area. And usually, once you get through to the latter half of October and the month of November, you tend to find that the Caribbean remains conducive, even towards the eastern Caribbean and the western portion of the MDR. You've actually got the highest anomalies compared to average anywhere in the Atlantic Basin away from the far north. But the interest enough here, Paddy, obviously a combination of both tropical and baroclinic, hence why it's a subtropical feature. Not fully tropical, so it's typically named a subtropical system. But notice here that the water temperatures around where Paddy is at the moment remains quite anomalously warm. If we look at the actual SSTs, temperatures are 22, 23 Celsius here, considerably warmer than average, but still well below the threshold to support a tropical system. But you quite often find this at this time of the year, kind of weird and funky developments take place even out with the tropical belt. And, Paddy appears to be one of those classic examples. But notice the warmth to the east and to the west of the Leeward Islands. We've got 30 Celsius, and those waters, like I say, extend quite far down also. So looking at the prospects of Paddy, first of all, you can see here this is the cone suggested by the NHC. We've got this system expected to be, a subtropical system through the Azores, so wet and windy conditions here. Then it moves generally eastwards towards Iberia, probably bringing some wind and rain across western and northwestern areas of the Iberian Peninsula. Northern Portugal, northwestern Spain, for example, would be impacted by that. Obviously, we've not got actually a development with both these areas of interest, Disturbance 2 and Disturbance 1. So I don't know if there's necessarily anything. Yeah, it's not giving us a cone or anything because there's nothing actually truly developed. Let's actually look at the IR imagery first and foremost here, just real quick, and see what it's indicating. Just bear with me a little second, and we'll see what the Atlantic Basin is actually looking like. Is it going to let me show? Just bear with a second here. So this is the visible imagery at the moment. Play through the loop, and you can see what it's indicating here. So Paddy's away off the screen here. There's that area of interest here in the far south of the Caribbean. Nothing much to look at here, but you can see a clear circulation, a clear spin within the cloud structure here. We've also got that feature just to the north of Puerto Rico here. Again, nothing really much to write home about. But the thing to keep in mind is the fact that the MJO is now moving into the East Pacific and into the Western Atlantic Basin. So like I've already said, we during the past few weeks, we've seen the widespread subsidence over the Atlantic, so less favourability for anything development. We've had a lot of convection more over the West Pacific. The West Pacific is now starting to quieten down because we've actually got sinking now replacing the upward motion here. But as we play through this loop here off the GFS, you can see that the rising motion then extends across the Atlantic basin. So I think we've got a threat over the next couple of weeks of seeing a few developments with this more favourable overall environment. Looking at the ECM AI model here, so this is the artificial intelligence. We've got two features. There's the remnants of our currently subtropical storm Paddy. You notice here that it moves towards the northwest of Iberia and really fizzles out really actually before it even reaches the Iberian Peninsula. Then we've got the features, one to the north of Puerto Rico, one over the southern Caribbean. The modelling suggests that these two features merge. We've got a lot of moisture here. Thanks to that MJO active phase now moving into this region, you're increasing the levels of moisture within this environment here. Very strong area of high pressure, if you notice, off the east coast of the United States. We've got a trough, we've got a southward digging jet stream here, increasing the strength of the shear over the far north of the Gulf. We actually could see further upwelling of colder waters along the shelf here. But generally, the environment over the Gulf of Mexico isn't overly conducive. But we've got a window of opportunity here within the Caribbean for some sort of development over the next couple of days. Obviously, NHC has 60% over the next 48 hours, and we've got an 80% over the next 7 days. But as we see the trough digging over the southern plains here in combination with the ridge to the east of North America, that then creates a bit of a pathway for this feature to then move up into the eastern Gulf. And it looks as if the AI model is suggesting pressure drops below 1,000 millibars, clips the Cayman Islands, the western side of Cuba, moves up into the eastern Gulf. Remember that we've got colder than average water temperatures here, but nonetheless, the modelling is suggesting that this feature manages to get through both the shear and the subpar water temperatures and moves up into the northwest of Florida, up into the Big Bend area. Now, this is the AI model. There's going to be multiple other different slight adjustments to that, depending on what model you look at. Looking at the shear compared to average, and this is what we're looking at the moment. We've actually got above average shear in the area just to the around that invest area here that has quite a high chance of development. We've got slightly less shear just to the north of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola, over Cuba, over the western Gulf, extending up towards Florida. Here we've got actually a reduction in shear. If you notice here, the reds represent above average shear. But what is going to take place is, as we play through this, you notice that the shear values drop over the northwestern side of the Caribbean, through the Yucatan Straits and into the Gulf of Mexico. Here we've got stronger shear associated with a digging trough here, if you notice. And then as we play through, you can see that we are reducing the shear quite substantially. I'm actually looking at this chart and thinking to myself, am I actually looking at this wrong? Is this is slightly embarrassing, but is the blues above average or below average? Because I'm noticing that the shear values decrease significantly, or is it increasing significantly? Let me know in the comments section below. Am I reading that correct? I'd be curious to know. But it's interesting nonetheless how we're significantly reducing the shear over the Gulf of Mexico from what I can visualize anyway. Maybe I'm wrong with that, but nonetheless, rather interesting. I think I'm correct in saying that, because this looks as if this would be where the jet would be, and then a reduction in shear over to the south of that. Like I said, let me know in the comments section below if I'm incorrect or correct with that. Looking at the GFS model here real quick for the same time frame and see what it's suggesting. So again, like I say, we've got the big wheel of high pressure off the east coast. We've got a digging trough over the southern states here. We've got the features both to the north of Puerto Rico, over the south Caribbean. They are seen by the models to merge into one. Notice here that the GFS has this feature moving into Cuba, slightly further east compared to the AI model here. And then as we see the period into the middle portions of next week, instead of it moving up towards the northwest of Florida, northeastern Gulf, it's actually drifting more into the central Gulf of Mexico. So this is the difference in the solutions depending on what model you look at here. And then it just dissipates as it moves into the lower 48. Now, another interesting one to look at here is the rainfall percentage compared to average. We've got significant flood threat over parts of Central America in recent days here. And if we look at the precipitation anomalies over the next 7 days, you can see what it is indicating. Let's go back because the model is currently updating. So let's go to the next 7 days. We've seen significant flooding in parts of Puerto Rico and adjacent areas, northwestern portions of northwestern South America. We've also seen significant flooding in parts of Venezuela and Colombia, but also this region here where we've got that feature expected to drift northwards. We've got significant rainfall anomalies across parts of Hispaniola, Jamaica, Cuba, up into Florida as well. We've got significant rain, and then Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize. We've got significant rain also. Remember that we're seeing more in the way of widespread, large-scale upward motion in this region. So the atmosphere's ability to produce more moisture increases significantly as you've got the MJO pulse moving into this region. If we go back to the GFS model here real quick and then look at the levels of moisture within the atmosphere here. So this is the humidity values here at 7 to 300 HPA. Let's go back to the current situation because we've got a lot of dry air as well as shear in the northern Gulf at the moment. So this is as of today. We're increasing that moisture level within north portions of South America through Central America. There's a lot of dry air, if you notice here, up towards the north portions of the Caribbean into the Gulf of Mexico. If we play through this loop here, you notice that we're increasing the moisture levels. There's that feature here. Tremendous amounts of dry air getting drafted around that high to the north. So we're tongue of very dry air getting driven across Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. Notice here that we're pulling that moisture up from Central America, up from South America, up through the Caribbean here. And then as it moves northwards here, we're kind of dissipating some of that dry air and bringing that moisture up into this region of the eastern Gulf of Mexico here. But then it really starts to see shear increase as well as that. It's going to entrain dry air according to the GFS, and therefore I would fully expect this thing to kind of die off as it moves into the Gulf of Mexico because the environment becomes a lot less conducive. So yeah, nothing imminent, nothing major to speak about, but there is an increase in chance of seeing significant rain across parts of the Caribbean over the next several days. I think wind is not going to be as much of a feature as rainfall is going to be. Finally, looking at the situation regarding the La Nina, we do have an increase in westerly winds, actually, not easterly. Easterly winds is what you would want to see over the Pacific Basin to increase the upwelling and then cool the surface layer. The problem is that because we've had the MJO moving across the Pacific in recent days, what has happened is we've actually slightly warmed Nino region 3.4 with westerly winds, pushing some of that warmth from the western side of the equatorial basin eastwards towards the central Pacific. And therefore, what we're seeing is a slight change. So if you notice here in Nino region 3.4, we've actually seen a slight warming trend taking place. Then if we move to this graphic here over a 7-day change, and you notice here that we've actually warmed things up over the central portion of the Pacific also. So that could actually be an interesting one with regards to the winter prospects. Looking at the MJO, this is the ECM indicating that it is now rotating into the favourable phases for enhanced activity over the Atlantic Basin. Obviously, there's a lot of different factors now to get taken into consideration. We've got the colder air now moving southwards. We've got drier air. We've got increase in shear. the jet stream's getting pushed further south, and therefore we're kind of losing that ability now for the environment to be conducive for anything significant coming up from the south. Tends to be the Central America and the Caribbean that really is under threat. But, funny things can happen. You get a small window of opportunity, and parts of the southern United States can have impact from tropical features even into the month of November. But like I say, the environment overall becomes less conducive as we move into the period. This is a Hovmüller chart showing 850 millibar zonal wind anomaly. So these are the winds at 5,000 feet or 850 above the surface of the ocean. And you can see here that we did have a fairly decent easterly over the Central Pacific. That's going back to the period between generally the 11th through the 26th of October. Then from the 26th of October for the next week or so, you can see here these yellows and oranges showing up. Now, this is the map here showing what the winds are doing. So generally over the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent, we've got some fairly strong easterly trades blowing. So that is winds blowing through the Nina region or La Nina region. Basically, we've got conducive winds over the Indian Ocean and the maritime continent, but we've actually got westerly winds blowing over from about the date line, so that's 180 degrees west, all the way to South America. It looks like we've got winds blowing out of the west, which therefore would suggest to me that we are likely to increase this temperature from around 1C below average, which is well within La Nina territory. You want half a degree or colder below average for La Nina territory, but you notice here that we're starting to creep back towards a half a degree above below the average. And what wouldn't surprise me is that we actually creep above the half a degree and we actually move back out of La Nina territory, and Nina region 3.4 is back to neutral. Wouldn't be surprised if we see a continued warming of this region over the next week or two here due to those westerly winds and due to the fact that the MJO is moving in through the East Pacific and the Atlantic Basin. That tends to trigger westerlies as opposed to easterlies. So this La Nina is really having a hard time getting going, and quite frankly, if from a winter point of view, this actually wouldn't be a particularly bad thing, because if you warm the Central Pacific, you increase the chance of the Manchulan Oscillation being in a more favourable phase 7, 8, and possibly 1. That would suggest more of an increased chance of seeing blocking within the high latitudes and a colder pattern for Eastern North America and Western Europe here. So it's all connected, and I try my very best to join the dots and show you what I'm seeing. So like and subscribe as always. Join me at 4 p.m. tomorrow UK time for the live stream, and we'll be looking at all things global. Stay tuned and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Bye for now.